My name is Mike Rauch. I'm 25 years old. Today is June 27th, 2007, and I'm here at FDNY's Counseling Service Unit with Ashley Taheri, my interviewee, I guess, today, my interview partner.
My name is Ashley Taheri. I'm 48 years old. Today is June 27th, 2007. We're at the FDNY CSU at 251 Lafayette Street, and I'm the interviewee.
Great. So, I guess maybe to start, I'm just curious when you began working here at CSU.
I began working here at the very end of October or the beginning of November of 2001. I knew somebody who worked here. I had called that day. I had an internship a number of years ago where I worked for EMS, so I was familiar with some of the people at the counseling unit. So the day of September 11th or the day after, I made a phone call just to say that if they wanted help or anything, that I would be able to do that. I was just finishing a job. Actually, September 11th was the last day of my other job. I was doing fee-for-service work in Brooklyn, which means I was working at a counseling service doing individual work with clients. And that center was closing, so that was my last day.
So September 11th, 2001 was actually your last day at that job?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what that day was like?
Sure. It was a Tuesday, and it was stunning. And my husband was home, and he was going to take our 4-year-old to his first day of pre-K. And I was bummed that I couldn't go, but I had a job that I had to do. And so about 9-something, I had left my building, and I lived at 14th and 6th Avenue. And I was walking across 6th Avenue, and a lot of people were looking in one direction. And in New York, I've learned that if people, well, anywhere, are looking in one direction, I tend to look as well. And what I saw was a big hole in the towers. I didn't know which, and only one hole at that time. So I called my husband on my cell before I was going into the train because I knew I would lose signal. And he must have been giving Julian a bath, I don't know, but he didn't pick up the phone. I was like, pick up the phone, something's happened. You should know about it because the pre-K school that we were taking my son to was downtown. And so I didn't have any options because I had a client to go to, so I couldn't just skip that. So I just kept going. And I was in the subway for 25 minutes or so, and I got out, and it's about a 2-block walk to the facility. I went in. I had a little bit of news from the woman at the front desk, and I had a basement office in this location, so I knew nothing of what was happening from 9:45 to 10:30 probably. By the time I got out, and I had records to finish, by the time I got out, everybody had left. I was the only one there, except for the person at the front desk. And so they told me what they knew had happened. So I left the building, and I went to the F train, and the F train wasn't running. And I was struck by an unimaginable amount of paper floating, and dust, and paper. And I knew something terrible had happened, and I don't think it registered, even though she must have told me that one of the buildings came down, and by that time both of them had probably come down. But in Brooklyn, I wasn't able to look across where I was, so I couldn't see if they were there or not. And but I was struck by how much paper there was. It was just like falling snow. And so I started walking. I was terrified. I didn't know where my husband was. I didn't know where my son was. I got to the bridge. I stopped at a hardware store, and they were giving out masks, which I thought was I've always wanted to go back and thank them, but I never did. And got to the bridge, and they wouldn't let anybody over. And I could see people coming over, just caked in darkness. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate to get back to my family. That's all I knew. So I ended up walking back along the way I'd come. I couldn't get to any phones. My phone service was out. I swore I'd never use the phone company that I had, and I never have since. It was Sprint, I think, and their antenna was on top of the World Trade Center. So I had no info. And miraculously, it was about 2 by this time, maybe, that I was walking back and going back to the office, even though I knew the office was closed. I knew no one in Brooklyn, and these 2 rather official-looking guys were coming out of an F train stop, and I asked them, "Is it running?" And they said, "Yes." And I thought, okay, and I went down, and I was sitting next to this guy. There were 2 of us sitting on this whole track. He had a bicycle with him, and we were sort of looking at each other. It was just completely surreal. And then this empty sort of F train shows up, and we get on it, and I got to my corner in 20 minutes and went upstairs and found my husband and my son. Okay, and that meant a lot to me. And we were living at that time in a tall building, so we were able to, unfortunately, look from the roof. So we spent almost the day looking from the roof.
What did you talk about while you were on the roof?
How terrible it was. How terrible it was, I guess. How unimaginable. People kept saying that they didn't believe it. It occurred to me that my son was beginning to see too much. And my husband, who's a news hound, had the TV on a lot. And my son, I think, had just seen way too much. Didn't understand it, but knew something terrible had happened. So that was hard, because it was everywhere. It was something that was hard not to look at, hard to look at. You know, there were people in the building who didn't come home, people who had pets. There were people in the building who were trying to figure out who hadn't come home, who hadn't made it out of the World Trade Center, you know. And we lost, I think, 3 people in that building.
Who's the 3 people in the building that you lived in?
In the building that I lived in, right. It's about a 200-unit building.
Were you close to any of them?
No, I didn't know them.
Mm-hmm.
But it was profound, though, that they just didn't come home, you know, and one of them had pets, and there were a lot of pet lovers in New York in general. And so there was a great concern in some way, I think, to want to do something, you know. And by that time, I'd called the counseling unit and said if there was anything that they needed. And at one point, I got a call back, a call back, sort of more official, saying, "Come in, we need someone to come in." So I did, and then I started working here. I started working half days because I had a young son who was in half day. So I worked 21 hours a week, but I was filled up with clients. I was working so much that it was an average load of what you do in a whole day, given the way we structure things here. I was seeing 7-8 clients a day, and that was just a lot. And if you're full-time, you see 7-8 clients, 6-7 clients a day. You're supposed to have 6 clients a day here.
Do you feel like you were prepared for what that experience was like?
No. I don't think I was prepared. I had very mixed feelings about working for the fire department. I had no mixed feelings about coming here and doing work, but I was leery about working with firemen. they're tough. They're typically adolescents. They are wonderful, but they tend to be conservative. I don't know. They're just a very unique bunch of guys, and I felt like I was pretty sure that as a civilian and as a female, it would be a rough haul. I've since come to be very endeared to them in general, but I know that was an issue for me. I don't think I anticipated becoming so endeared, and I did not anticipate the level of trauma, although I think I must have on some level known that. But just the level of trauma, what people had gone through, and how they barely survived, and how many people they knew who didn't survive, and how hard that was. There's a poster, I don't know if you've seen it, and I know there's so many other people than just the fire department. There's this poster there that's just about the fire department. There's 343 pictures. And I did not obviously have that up in my office, but a lot of guys would refer to it, and most of them knew at least one person on every line. You know, the things that the losses were profound, because as big of a job as it is, it's a small job. People know each other. There's a lot of family.
Is your son, how old is your son now?
9.5.
9.5. And how aware is he at this age of...
It's interesting. I'm sorry, Doug.
Go ahead.
He knows the towers came down. He knows the work that I do. He says that I sit with people and talk with them and help them. He, for a while, and there were a lot of parallels here, a lot of the families of fallen firefighters and families of firefighters who survived, their kids were doing very similar things, a lot of parallels, where depending on the age, the kids would play out stuff. They would build Legos of buildings and then have something crash into them. And my background is such that though I don't specialize in kids, I knew enough to know that was processing, kind of trying to work it out. But he knew. He was too young to get what he saw on TV, but I think he saw too much on TV, and I think it took a bit of time. He didn't show an inordinate fear. When I left, Bill or I would have to leave the home. He wasn't surrounded by loss. He was really kind of protected. It wasn't like in the fire department where kids come from similar neighborhoods and the kid next to them doesn't have a dad suddenly. So in that way, he was very kind of protected. You know, but if he wanted to talk about it, we did. And if he wanted to process it out by playing that stuff, I sometimes couldn't sit with him and do it, but I didn't ask him not to.
What's your son's name?
Julian.
Julian. Oh, right. Okay. Where does the name come from?
A name we liked.
Just a name.
There's no family connection.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how he and other kids sort of processed or worked out this event. How are some of the ways you've done that? You've processed?
I don't know that. It's a good question, because the work, we were knee-deep, figuratively, literally. We were really inundated with mass loss and trauma. And when you do that work, it's taxing. And if you're not good at taking care of yourself and setting limits, then you run into some problems, I think. It's difficult. It seeps into other areas of your life. And that's what happened with me, I think. I don't think I gave myself much time to process. I sort of was too over-involved in navigating other people's loss and helping them. And that was hard. I remember one day somebody asked me how old I was, and I started here when I was 42. And at the time that they asked me, I had said that I was 42, and I went back into the lunchroom about 20 minutes later, and I said, I'm not 42, I'm 44. And it occurred to me that I had lost kind of 2 years of my life. Like, it just didn't occur to me that I was older than that. And it was almost as though my life had gone on hold. But my life hadn't gone on hold. My son had grown. I don't know that I was as aware. I feel like I lost a lot. It's hard.
You said that you weren't really aware of what happened. You knew that something bad had happened that day. What did you think might have happened? Did you have any ideas of?
Well, I think by the time I had learned that the second plane had gone into the building, when I had come back up from the basement, and the person had told me at the front desk that the second building had gone in, I knew that meant that this wasn't some accident. And I was also living here in 93, although I was very uninvolved with that, but it made some sense. I think it was the fact that it was incomprehensible to me that everything would perish like that, just collapse. So I think that just didn't register for me. And for me, I'm very visual. I need to see it. I think for myself, in something that intense, I need to see what's not there in order to register it. And it wasn't until I got to the bridge and saw people coming over and saw that the towers weren't there that it really, really struck me. And it's funny because I vowed never again, I don't know if I'll stick to this, but that I would never again leave the borough that my family was in. Like, I would not work outside the borough that my family, I would never be divided by water.
So and your family lives here in Manhattan?
We live in Chelsea, and I work here. And I think the hardest part was not being able to walk home. I couldn't get past the bridge. They weren't letting anybody in. I didn't work for the fire department. I had no ID. I had ID, but I couldn't make it past the security. So that was very hard, very, very hard. That's why when that F train showed up, it was surreal. It was really something.
Yeah. So at the time you lived in Brooklyn, but you've since then moved?
No, I lived in Manhattan then too, but I worked in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I worked at the Neighborhood Counseling Center in Brooklyn, and that was my last day. And I was returning home to Manhattan.
So, going back to you went up on the rooftop with your husband and your son. You said, can you describe what you saw in front of you? What did things look like? There were constant
sirens. We were at 14th Street, so Bellevue was quite close to us. There was, I don't know if the temporary morgue was set up at that time there, but there were constant sirens. There was terrible black smoke. Terrible smoke that came, and a terrible smell that came, and the smell lasted for days and for weeks, and it was carnage. I mean, it was the smell of people and the smell of stuff you don't want to smell, but it was seeing just burning and burning,
Do you still live in the same apartment? Do you still go up on that roof?
No, about 2 months before this, 2 months before September 11th, we had purchased an apartment in Chelsea, and so we were going to move. And it's funny because when we finally did move in January of '02, which I don't remember much of either, we have a sweet apartment, but it was hard for me. I don't know that I wanted to leave that other apartment. I'm not sure what that was about, but that was about September 11th more than anything else. It's a different layout and stuff too, but it was about, I don't know, feeling more removed, even though it was like 9 blocks away, not that far.
Your apartment was 9 blocks away from the World Trade Centers?
No, the apartment that I purchased was 9 blocks away from where I was living at the time of that day. So that day I was living at 14th and 6th, and then I moved to 21 and 7. So that's about 6 or 8 blocks.
Do you know the hardware store that you stopped and you said you took a gas mask?
It was on Court Street. It was on Court or Smith. I've never been in since, and I'd never been in there before. But I just remember people handing out paper masks. And I thought that was cool because I could have charged $10 a piece for them. People needed them.
Did you talk to anybody that day other than your family?
Just people in passing, people on top of the roof. I got phone calls. I don't know when, but we had phone calls from family. They were terrified.
Where does your family live mostly?
Well, I don't have much family, really. My parents are dead. I have an aunt who has Alzheimer's, so I don't think she's really conscious anymore. I have 2 cousins who live quite far away. But I also had friends who were calling, and people were terrified. They didn't know what was going on, and they just knew it was terrible,
Do you have any hopes for your son in the future?
That he live, frankly. That he be happy. That he chooses what he wants in life. But that he live. He loves this city. He's 9.5, and the other night we have a view of the Empire State Building, and he said to me, "This is such a beautiful," he said something so, he said, "Mom, this is the greatest place to live." And it is, but I don't know that I see it the same as I did. I sometimes feel like we're a target. I feel like there's a lot of unknowns. I saw way too much loss. I saw people who survived way too much loss. My son used to, I don't know if he remembers this, but I used to run a group on Thursday nights. It was for a particular population that had lost people on 9/11. And it was unfortunate because I didn't work Fridays. And in that way, it was good that I didn't work Fridays because you needed the time. But it was bad because it was hard. It's hard to be with a group of people who've lost the most important person in their life, or one of them. And I remember going home, and there were a couple weekends where I don't think I said a word. I don't think I spoke. I would go home and I would crawl in bed next to Julian, which was not like me. I mean, he had his own bed. He liked his own room. It wasn't, but I would need to touch him. It was the same with my husband, but more so with Julian. There was an innocence with him that, I needed a touchstone.
Yeah, it sounds like he's really important in your life in general.
Oh, yeah. They both are. We're a small family, and
Where was he born, Julian?
New York City, St. Vincent's, just where I was born. I mean, the same hospital. Was going to the same school. It's kind of cool for somebody that doesn't have a lot of family. That's pretty cool,
Yeah.
So, but I think, I wouldn't trade doing the work for anything, but I would do it with better self-care if I had known how to do that. And I've always said it took a piece of my soul. It really does. So, it's different. It's different work now, which is good. That's good, But you get caught up in something that's bigger than yourself by an immeasurable amount. And I think it's easy to get lost.
How has the work changed?
Oh gosh, there's 9/11 pieces to it, and every once in a while I will get a client who's very traumatized by 9/11 who's just not come in, which is usually pretty intense, because by the time 4 or 5 years passes, if you're really traumatized, it's etched pretty deep. It's kind of the best way I know how to say it. But a lot of the issues, what people bring in, relationship issues, there are things that are sort of like, how do you say, ripple. There's a ripple effect to 9/11, but also just to regular stressors of life. Family members die sadly, but of natural causes. People separate, people have marital issues, people aren't happy in their lives and kind of want to take a look at what's going on. People aren't getting along at their jobs. It's more varied work, and I have a private practice. It's more akin to doing more general sort of individual psychotherapy work, although we do short-term here and focused work, but it's not a barrage of trauma and loss. I worked, we all did work with people who just barely made it out. 2 inches to the left, 2 inches to the right. Turn left, go down the hall. Somebody else turned right. Right collapsed, left lived. A lot of questions about why me? Why'd I live? A lot of difficulties with wives of firefighters who survived, who said, I lost my husband. He never came out of that building. He's not who he was on September 10th. And they're right. They would know better than I, but truly, it's an experience that is forever changing.
Mm-hmm. Let me see here. I know something else. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. Since you started doing this work post 9/11, what's one of the sort of memorable experiences? I know maybe you can't talk very specifically about a client, but is there? Do you have any? How can I say, like,
I can tell
successes or something that you felt good about with a client, or maybe your own personal work and sort of working out how you feel about this thing?
Let's see. That's a big question. It was good to see that clients benefited from the work that we did. And I did see clients who began to give meaning to their life again and began to believe that life could be good and that there could be a future and that death was not constantly imminent. And that was good. But people live with memories, and whether it's following a truck because you have an arm and the truck is going away and it's filled with parts and you're trying to catch up so that you can put the arm in the truck. You know, people who won't eat particular types of food, they won't eat ribs anymore because of what they saw. I remember doing work with somebody where there was a lot of suffocation involved because he almost suffocated, and I would find myself at some points in sessions with him having a hard time breathing. You know, these were things that really kind of, you don't forget. They are keepers for them, and they are keepers for me too, in a way.
You personally had a hard time breathing.
But hearing what they went through and the kind of work we did was often to hear it over and over again, to try and desensitize them. It's a particular kind of work. But when you hear something over and over again, you begin to own it too.
Yeah.
So I think what was helpful for me was when I realized that I really was 44 and not 42, and that if I didn't kind of get my own bearings about where I was in my life, that it would be too costly for my family. And my husband wanted me out. Like, he's a good and gentle man, and he's not somebody who's like, do this or do that, but he said to me, the fire department's killing you. I mean, not the fire department itself, but the work is killing you. You know, but I was both addicted in a way. This is a funny line, but I was both completely drawn in by the work, but not handling it well. I don't think it's work that people can handle well in general, not en masse like this, not when everything is trauma. It's hard, you know. I've lost time with people that were about life and living. So that was very hard for me, and that's something that I regret.
I mean,
with
you
my
moved
family.
away, and the friendship has sort of...
Well, I lost friendships, not lost them, but I disconnect. I mean, I just wasn't around. People would try and... I'm not a great keeper of contacts. I have some old established friends, but for a while they kind of gave up on trying to get a hold of me because I just was not outside of this small world. That was costly. But what I mean also is that I lost time with my family. I lost time with my son and my husband that I can't get back. And I wish, for that, I regret the work. Other than that, I'm glad I did what I did. But it's kind of hard to move on from that too. But it's important to do, and so I tried to reacclimate myself to the outside world, to kind of re-engage, to have work matter a bit less, to set some limits, to redefine friendships that were good for me and those that were not.
Have you you've been feeling like you've had some successes in getting back on track in that sense? Yeah,
I do.
Is there any particular one that you would highlight, whether it be how you spend time with your family or a certain friend?
Reestablishing a friendship with a very old friend has been really great for me. Being a lot more involved with Julian, making it to places that I need to be there. Like today was his last day of school, and I made it there at noon because it's a big deal, you know, and just having my head kind of reprioritized has been really good for me. I took up knitting for a while, and then I took up jewelry making for a while, and I just needed to, you know, I did stuff that, I don't know, gave me some solace. It's funny, I watched a ton of Law & Order during this time, and I couldn't, like my husband used to laugh that the din of Law & Order was always in the background, and there was always this din of Law & Order, and I said to him finally, like, it's logical, it makes sense. There's bad guys, there's people that go after them, there's a judicial system that kind of comes in and is logical, and generally the bad guy gets caught. And I said, in this world of total trauma and chaos and upheaval where nothing went right. There was something about that. So that was pretty funny in a way, but it's true. I watched a ton of Law and Order, a ton of it, and I stopped reading. I was a voracious reader. I read a lot, fiction, not so much nonfiction, but fiction and mysteries, and I had stopped reading completely. I didn't have the concentration. I was traumatized. I was traumatized, you know. So therapy was very helpful. You know, supervision here was fairly helpful. Knowing that I had peers who were going through the same things was helpful. We were at different sites, and that made it more difficult, but it's been a long haul.
If you one day move on from this,
which I will,
this work, this particular job, or this kind of work that you do,
right,
what would you like to do? Do you know any?
It's interesting. I like my private practice a lot. It is enjoyable and fulfilling. So that's one thing I keep going. Don't laugh, but hospice work is something that I've always really enjoyed. And I say that because hospice is some people say, I don't know how you could think of doing that, but to me, death is generally a very natural part of life. And I've had a lot of death in my family growing up too. So to me, hospice work interests me. Going and getting a job in middle management at a university has its pluses, like getting me completely out of this sort of, I don't know, but I'm thinking much more about it. So we'll see. But I know I need to move on. I just do. Place has too many memories, and changes that come from a vacuum of something so intense aren't always, I don't know, it's just different, that's all.
Is there anything with your family that you do together that sort of almost takes you out of this space, this sort of...
oh, yeah. Just being together and puttering around and going to street fairs and, I don't know, just hanging out is really lovely. I can enjoy them a lot. I leave work at work now. I can do that, and that's a gift to me and to them.
Any favorite places that you go together?
Maine, if I can get there.
Where in Maine?
Rockland area, Spruce Island, Owl's Head, that area.
What's there?
Beauty, quiet.
It's a beach, forest?
The beach, the sea, the forest, the quiet.
Good. Is there anything in the last minute that we didn't get to, or anything that you want to say?
I don't think so. But I think I'm very appreciative of this, because I think it's a good way to process, literally, you know, for me. So for that, I'm grateful.
Good. Well, thanks for coming today. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Me too.